Welcome to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Our expert analysis on matchups and statistics will give you the edge in betting and on your friends. Use our insights to predict NFL outcomes like nobody else and always be the smartest guy in the room. The inaugural episode of our podcast. I'm your host, Sasha Bouska, joined by CEO and co-founder of Field Vision Sports, Scott Bouska, and Match Quarters owner and director of football for Field Vision Sports, Cody Alexander. Scott, Cody, how we feeling today?
Feeling good.
What is up, fellas? I'm feeling amazing. It's good to talk to you, not on a Zoom meeting where we're talking about the business of Field Vision and actually get to talk some football. That title of CEO is a little formal, Sasha.
You're earning the title, Scott.
I don't think that's a good thing. So let's just go to Cody.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys. I'm glad to be here. Anytime we can nerd out, especially about defensive and defensive back play, I'm down.
Awesome stuff. The matchup will be a podcast that dives deep into the matchups of football, a little deeper than anyone else, using our analytics, prowess, statistics, rankings, everything that we have at our disposal at Field Vision Sports. But I think it makes sense, as I mentioned, with this being the inaugural episode, to just dive a little bit deeper into what Field Vision Sports is off the top here and talk about what all of that entails. So we'll start with the CEO himself. Scott, if I said, what is Field Vision Sports, how would you answer that?
Field Vision Sports is the best analytics company in football. Is that the right answer? We call ourselves the first predictive analytics platform built specifically for the everyday football fan. There's a ton of data and information running around football, the game, the industry, and most of it sits in the hands of a select few, right? Like coaches have a ton of data, players, quarterbacks have a ton of data, front offices have a ton of data, and I think our listeners would say sportsbooks actually have a ton of data, but fans don't, and they don't have easy access to it. So what we're trying to do is give that information to the hands of the fans. Like the way I think about it is we're trying to give Andy Reid's brain, Kyle Shanahan's brain, Pat Mahomes' brain, give insight into the things they're thinking about on a week-to-week basis to our fans. So I think people will find it pretty cool.
Yeah. So, Cody, I'll follow up with you on what Scott was talking about there. Do you agree with him? That's a gap in the market and something that fans are looking for. Is that a little bit of the reason you got involved with this?
Yeah, that was a big part of when you look at what is out there just for the consumer, just in general, there's really not a lot, and everything's behind not necessarily a paywall in the sense of you pay a little subscription and you get out. It's like a huge paywall. This is like most of these people have built a moat around them. You don't really know how or where the data is coming from. Where is the science behind it? Is it going to match what's going on film? And that's something like, especially when Scott came to me and talked to me first about Field Vision, was I had participated in the Big Data Bowl, and I just did not realize just the lack of a lot of transparency within this side of the sport, but also just the gatekeeping that is around it by a lot of these big companies. The big one obviously is PFF, and they own everything, right? Like you can't really look away. ESPN's another big one where they have some of these metrics. How do you have access to it? How do you see where it's built? And that was one of the things that really brought me in as somebody who's analytic friendly, but on the coaching side of things, I was fired up when Scott told me about his vision.
Yeah. And Cody, I want to get to like how Field Vision can help people who already know a ton about football, but you brought up your background there. Let's just take a second, and I'll do this with Scott as well, but framed in a different way. Just tell people a little bit about your background and why you're so into football.
Yeah, so I grew up in a football household. My father was a teacher and a coach, and so it was just something that we did. I played football in college. I GA'd at Baylor early on in 11, 12, and 13. Wanted to coach college, didn't necessarily happen. And so I've really been pretty much a high school football coach. And then I started Match Quarters as a way to have a conversation, a deeper level conversation about football. I was reading football books. I was reading football articles. I didn't think that they were very good. There were a lot of dents, a lot of verbiage, a lot of jargon. Wanted to have a place that people could find defensive side of things and be able to communicate. And that's built into a full-time business, which I've done really the past 2 years. I've been able to do this full time, and I kind of left coaching. And then when Scott came to me and was like, I want to do this, is something that I've really been interested in since working in the NFL's Big Data Bowl a couple of years ago. And I thought the pathway would be to work for a team, but it's so hard when you're not a data scientist to then work in the data part of the NFL. Even though we have these things and these metrics, and we've talked about data for a while now in the NFL, it's still very much in the infancy. And so this gave me an opportunity to tie both of those things that I really enjoy doing, which is the coaching side of things, the film side of things, to the analytics department.
I was just going to say, for the listeners that don't know Cody yet, they'll get to know Cody very well. He pretty much only speaks in football, which is, you'll understand it, but it's a different language. So we'll be sure to publish a glossary of terms after the episodes if you don't understand everything that Cody says.
Yeah, and for Cody, it just comes naturally to speak in football. It's not like he's trying to go over your head or make you feel stupid. He's just that smart that he can. That's a little on Cody's background, and I appreciate you sharing that with the listeners, Cody, and what brought you into the fold. I want to ask you, Scott. We talked a little bit about what Field Vision is. What gave you the idea to start Field Vision? How did we get down this road of Field Vision Sports now, several months in as a company and getting ready to launch for this football season?
Yeah, as you know, Sasha, because you're my brother, if people can't tell by the last names, I'm a lifelong Chiefs fan, which was tough for 35 years. It's been much better the last 5 or 6, but that's just a way to say I've always been a massive fan of football. I used to be an NFL agent. I listen to, quite frankly, like, I just consume massive amounts of podcasts like this one. And I've listened to dudes for years talk about the matchups within the game and talk about defenses people are going to play and how players and offenses and quarterbacks match up against those defenses. But I continuously wondered to myself, it feels like they're just giving opinions. Why is there no analytics behind it? And why can't they quantify the things that they're telling me a little bit more? So it felt like there was a bit of a gap. As I explored more, I think we found out that really no one's doing what we're trying to do, which is to use machine learning, AI, big data to look at what's historically happened in football and predict what we think is going to happen in the future. So, fan of football, but also a consumer need, and I think hopefully a business opportunities. Like I said earlier, I think we're doing something really cool, and do think we're going to bring insights to football fans that, quite frankly, they haven't had up to this point.
Yeah. So I want to follow up on that because and maybe at some point we'll have to make our data scientist of the company come on and talk like way in the weeds. We'll see about that.
You want to talk about
How,
a different language?
in your opinion, Scott and Cody, you can jump in on this too if you want. Why do you think that football has been a very popular sport in this country for 100 years? There's a whole industry around creating content about football, but it was still a lot of people on TV just giving their opinions, breaking down film, giving educated opinions, but not putting a lot of data behind it. Why do you think that is in the sport of football? And is there something unique that makes it harder to do? And also, is there something unique that makes it more valuable to do if you can do it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't want to nerd out of this too much, but quite frankly, Sasha, I think the reason people haven't done it is because it's hard. And what I mean by that is, if you think about Moneyball 1.0, the Michael Lewis revolution, like, it was done in baseball, and baseball is a series of independent events that are like largely uncorrelated and not dependent on each other, right? Like, pitch happens, guy hits ball, guy goes to second, goes to third, etc. Football's a really complicated game of like highly interdependent variables that all depend on each other. Defense does one thing, offense has to react. When offense goes the other side of the field, the defense adjusts. So things are dynamic within a play, like before the play, quite frankly, with formation, within a play, and then within a series, within a quarter, within a game, which, to be honest with you, like, lends itself really well to modern technologies of machine learning, generative AI, like trying to look at what's happening with variables and predict what we think is going to happen in the future. But as we have found out over the last several months, it's really freaking hard to do. And like, I'll say this all the time, but our point of view at Field Vision is like, the data always gets better with football context, and the football context always gets better with the data. And we've spent months and months trying to perfect that and put the two of them together to get to the best outcome.
Cody, do you think because of the complexity of getting this data, it becomes that much more valuable to somebody who does have the football context if you can do it in a way that's consumable?
Yeah, the problem that you have in football is, like Scott mentioned it, is that you don't have just a series of individual events that lead to either a score or some event within the game. There's 11 players on both sides of the field. They're all doing completely different things. Each team has its own unique language, skill set. It's a chaos sport. And I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I've said this before. Like, football is a game of attrition and it's a game of chaos. And so trying to harness that chaos, there are patterns within it. But I think when you try and do like Moneyball stuff, where you're trying to just take like these stats and try and project how this is going to work, you lose a lot of the ability of what's actually going on the field. So things like the offensive line is always one of the hardest to do. We're talking today, we're going to talk about corners and things like that. And that's another one that's really hard. But I think, like, going with Scott, like, we are now at a time where football can be harnessed with AI and machine learning. And part of that is just because we've finally become a space sport. So if you think of where have analytics really kind of reigned, basketball. If you go and look at basketball, it's pretty much all 3-and-D, right? It's every you play defense, you shoot threes, and you hit layups. And the mid-range jumper is completely gone because of analytics. You go to soccer, which soccer has been another space sport. Hockey has now, with analytics, and a lot of these things have all grown. Football is on the back burner too, because of the way football is rigged on the coaching side. And then when you have data scientists that come in, a lot of people, because it is brand new, want to do a bunch of white paper. And all that means is they're trying to do like really nitty gritty scientific stuff. So when you take it to a coach, they're like, I don't know what the hell any of this means. How can I do this? And a lot of times in football, and this is really the problem with analytics in football, is it's post-op, meaning that you're telling me things that I already know. Like, we know we have a bad left guard. That's why teams attack him. Like, I get that. We know that the pocket collapsed and we got a sack. We know that this receiver's really good because he gets a lot. Like, I can tell that as a coach. What can I do in game, and then how can I project that going forward? And I think that's where we are ahead of everybody in terms of trying to do these predictive analytics, but using the actual football and what's going on a play-to-play basis.
Yeah. Do you think the uptake on the detailed analytics and like the machine learning and using these analytics has been slower because football already has such a culture of watching film and dissecting things, and it's all with the eye test, but people are analyzing things to the nth degree in football. They're just not doing it scientifically necessarily. Whereas other sports like basketball that we talked about, and maybe even soccer to an extent, I'm less familiar with soccer than basketball, are more, for lack of a better term, roll out the ball sport and let your athleticism take over.
Yeah, it's a very much of a skilled sport, right? Football is completely different. And that's the thing. Like, I had a conversation at the Big Data Bowl 2 years ago with Mike Lopez, who's in charge of analytics for the NFL. And one of the things that he said to me, and it's resonated with me, is the goal is to have a coach that's analytics friendly, work with a data scientist to create things that are applicable to the sport. And one of the things that we did was create X pass rush. And so we were able, with the team that I had, we became finalists with, we created a way that you could predict whether a defender was going to rush the pass or not. Well, that changes the game for a coach, where we can now set protections off of certain defensive looks. I know a guy is going to blitz when he lines up in this area. In fact, it was kind of the genesis for what Amazon did this year in Prime Vision, of where the defensive alert, where they were with AI predicting who would go. You get the little red ring and it would ding whenever a defender was in an area that they felt like he would blitz. Those are the things that you can really use as a football coach. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is relate this back to, let's have real intuitive player ratings, to where it's not just some arbitrary guy or ESPN talking to a bunch of anonymous executives. Because at the end of the day, we're all very biased for what we do. And I think you're correct with coaches in particular are very dogmatic. They're used to watching film, the eye test, your coach to look for these things. But a lot of that is anchor bias. And so having a coach who can come in and talk to analytics departments and communicate that and be able to play that middleman. I think those bridge builders, that's where the future of NFL is going to happen first. It's going to be right there. Once people ever get their analytics departments, having that guy who can go and talk to the coaches and be analytics friendly as well, that's what the piece that's missing a lot of times in the NFL.
Now, Scott, we're going to dive into some actual football talk here in defensive side of the ball stuff. But just real quick to wrap up this conversation, we've danced all around it. And I think based on this conversation, people have a general idea of what field vision is, what it does. But just in layman's terms, easy to understand, what can people expect from field vision as the season comes along?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know we've been talking a lot about the football Illuminati, if you will, the coaches and players and the owners. Like Field Vision's building a product for fans, right? And so what they can expect is on September 1st, which is 4 games before the Chiefs play the Ravens on Thursday Night Football to kick off the season. On September 1st, there'll be a mobile app. They can come for free. They can come and give it a trial. And we will have predictions, but both on the matchups that we think are best for that game and for week 1 of the NFL season. So we'll have predictions on what we think is going to happen. We'll have betting recommendations, and we'll have a ton of amazing content. So September 1st, launching an app. You'll all be able to try it for free. And like I said, there will be predictions and pretty deep, detailed analysis on what we believe is going to happen, not only in Chiefs Ravens on Thursday night, September 5th, but every game in week 1 of the NFL season. And then every week for all 18 weeks into the playoff after that, we will be giving you the best matchups in the NFL from a week-to-week basis.
Love it. Good stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. Right now, you can check it out at fieldvisionsports.com. Just a chance to sign up for early access, get on the newsletter, learn more about what's coming out. And then September 1st, 4 days, not 4 games before the season, we will release the app. Sorry, Scott. I got to correct you every once in a while.
Did I say 4 games before the season?
It felt like you did to me. Yeah. Cody might have heard it too.
That's probably a good opportunity to say we will not be doing preseason games because, well, it's preseason.
It's preseason.
Yeah. Nobody cares about preseason. Let's transition a little bit then. This week, Cody put out an article about zone man coverage trends in the NFL as far as corners go. We don't want to dive fully into the weeds on that. You can check out that article at fieldvisionsports.com if you want to go and get his opinions on the top 5 zone corners, top 5 man corners, and a little bit more about that. But just framing the defensive conversation holistically and using that article to do it, you talked a lot about the trends in the NFL as it relates to zone and man coverage. And I just want you to tell the audience a little bit about that, Cody.
Yeah, so particularly in the secondary, this is important because the NFL has always been, for a long time, a very much cover 1 league. You play man coverage, corners come into the league, they play man. Now, we've had our Tampa 2 generation in the early aughts, but really, if you go and look at that, was still very much a cover 3 with people playing a lot of man on the outside. Then we get our Pete Carroll, Legion of Boom. Again, a lot of cover 3, a lot of match coverage on the outside. Corners still have to be able to play man coverage. But I really think the biggest trend that we've seen in the past 5 years really starts in the 2018 season. This is when the Chiefs and the Rams played a basketball game on a Sunday where it shocked everybody. I mean, there were people who were like, this is not my grandfather's NFL. Like, I can't believe that we had 2 teams score over 40 points against each other. What is going on? And a lot of it had to do with the offenses always are ahead of the defenses. And so from 2018, so starting in 2019, we start seeing cover 1 plays drop. It goes from over 10,000, almost 10,500 snaps of cover 1, all the way down to just over 7,000 snaps this year. So we've had a huge drop in cover 1. Now, where are those snaps going? A lot of them are going to quarters. Has inherently always been a dirty word in the NFL. People don't want to run quarters. They will run quarters on long yardage downs, but it's not something that people are going to want to base in, especially like behind pressures and things like that. So those snaps actually went from 3,600 in 2019 all the way to now last year. We had 5,300 this year. So in the last 5 years, we've seen that grow. Cover 6, which is slightly related to quarters, has also risen in the last 5 years, but it's not just split field coverage. I think a lot of problem that we have is in 2020, Vic Fangio and Brandon Staley hit the scene. You see also in that 2018 Super Bowl, you see the Patriots use a too high shell to counter McVay's offense with a 6-man front. And people are like, okay, so we're now in this quarters generation. We're really not. Cover 3 has stabilized, but it still rose. So really an overarching idea here is that we are transitioning from a man-centric way of playing to being a more zone-heavy kind of ecosystem within the NFL. And a lot of it has to do with how offenses are structuring themselves.
For the listening public, Cody, that might not be, especially since you started a business called Match Quarters, so you may be the foremost expert in the world, but can you just, for the listeners, talk a little bit about like quarters, cover 6, cover 2? I know sometimes you call it middle of the field open, but can you just talk to the listeners about what that means and what defensive coordinators are trying to do when they do it?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start with cover 1. Cover 1 is cat coverage. Your cat versus their cat. It's matchup. My guy better be better than your guy. If your guy's better than my guy, we're in trouble, which is why teams are starting to move away from it. Quarters is your cover 4, right? You broke the field into quarters. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. Talk to 5 people about quarters, you're going to probably get 5 different answers. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're putting 4 DBs on 4 receivers. We're capping verticals. So if you think about it, the offense can only give out 5 guys, right? But we have a running back in the backfield. You have 4 other eligible receivers that are out, usually a tight end, 2 receivers, maybe another tight end, or a 3rd receiver. It's typically what we're seeing now. So we're going to cap those. We're going to cap those verticals. And now what we're doing is we're leaving the middle of the field open. So in cover 3 and cover 1, you have a closed post defense, meaning that we are closing the post by we're literally putting a defender in the middle of the field. Here's where this comes into play. Fade routes, they're really sexy, but they're really actually not a great route. They're very low completion rate. And again, it's a kind of a cat route, right? Like Megatron. I always think of like Megatron for the Lions. He was just so much better than everybody. He could go up and get the ball. That's when you want to run fade routes. You want things in front of the quarterback, making it easy throws. That's where the post is. But why are we seeing so much of this? And that's because we're seeing so many different ways of attacking that we've gotten. It's the spreadification of the NFL. The spread's won. In 2018, we can't go back from it. So even though teams are using more 12 personnel, 13 personnel, they're still running spread offenses, but they're using large personnel. We're seeing a lot of motion. That's another reason why we're seeing a lot of teams move to a too high shell, is that we're getting a lot of cross motion. We're getting a lot of quick motion. And so all that does is now with the cover 6 is essentially we're putting a cover 2 side. So think of it in geometry. Take you back to geometry class. We're building a triangle on one side. We're building a box on the other side. And that's where you get the cover 6. So you have quarters, which is basically a box. We're trying to build a box on both sides. You get cover 6. We're trying to build a triangle, which is cover 2. And then you're getting a box on the other side, which is quarters. And then you have all the different variations of cover 3. Like we could spend a whole hour-long talk about this, but that's generally what you need to know. The number that you get, that's usually typically how many deep defenders there are. And 6 is just 2 plus 4 makes it 6.
Yeah. Interesting stuff for sure. I think what interests me about it, you talk about that 2018 game with the Chiefs and the Rams. And the one thing I remember the most about that game, this anecdote might not even matter to the conversation, but I remember like being a Chiefs fan, I was sitting there with some friends and the Chiefs would have the ball on their own 20-yard line, 80 yards away from the goal line. And I was betting them, I bet they score in the next 4 plays with 80 yards to go. And I was winning all the bets. Like, I bet they score in the next 3 plays with 70 yards to go. It was just incredible. But you started talking about cover 1 and like it's a cat defense. My cat's better than your cat. Do you think a little bit of like the transition in defense is that there's not enough defensive cats, so to speak, that are better than all of these receivers coming? There's more Calvin Johnsons out there and less Deion Sanders.
Oh, yeah. It's 100% part of the ecosystem of the game. A 7-on-7. Most of these kids now that are getting drafted don't even know what life's like without 7-on-7. What do you mean you didn't have 7-on-7 leagues? You didn't have passing leagues in the summer. You didn't have passing leagues in the spring. I also would argue, though, that corners are more skilled now. They're more varied. I think defenses are smarter about their approach. The problem with cover one, when you have a lot of quick motions, is, and you're trying to play matchup, is that guy has to follow that guy everywhere, right? So now it used to just be you lined up. You had outside receivers, you had inside receivers, you had tight ends, you had running backs, you had full. Everybody had a peg, and you were in there. And guys that didn't fit that, they just didn't play in the NFL anymore. And I think we're getting to the point now where guys are more skilled. They're more varied. I wrote an article a week ago on Match Quarters about we are literally in the golden age of the nickel defender. And they all were drafted within the last 3 years. All the best nickels in the game now were all drafted within the last 3 to 4 years, really post 2018. And the reason why is that is a natural part of the ecosystem within the college football game. That's that part of that trickle up. And part of the spread, you need these hybrid players that are able to play that. I do agree with you, though, Sasha, about go to any high school in America. Guys want to play receiver. They want to play quarterback. They don't necessarily want to play corner. Defense is hard, right? Scott, you were talking about doing analytics in football is hard. That's why not everybody does it. Football is hard, man, especially at corner. Corner and quarterback are probably the two hardest positions. Everybody wants to be the quarterback because it's the celebrity position. Nobody really wants to be the corner because if you get beat, the band's playing, right? The fans are, and you are getting that shot over, and you're probably on top 10 in Sports Center. So that to me is part of it. And I do agree with you that offense, the way the rules are now, you really lend yourself to an offensive game.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. There's a personnel thing for sure. There's a personnel and a scheme thing for sure, but the NFL has also like very intentionally changed rules that make things more advantageous for the offense. Gone are the days of like Sean Taylor or Ed Reed or Ronnie Lott or whoever you want that can just decapitate receivers as they go across the field. There's also a lot of structural things that the league, Goodell, have also intentionally changed that have made the game like this.
I agree with you.
I 100% like the rules have swung in favor of the offense. What's fun to see is how like defenses fight back, because you look at 2018 and Mahomes is putting up video game numbers. I believe that was Lamar Jackson's rookie year too, and he was coming into his own. And all of these offenses looked like they could score 50 points anytime they wanted. But we haven't seen that like steadily increase over the last since 2018. If anything, offenses went backwards last year. So it's fun to see the defenses fight back and see that cat and mouse game between the two sides.
Back to the initial, like, why we talked about starting Field Vision and it being so fun is like, there isn't an answer that you can't solve for. It's like a continual game of cat and mouse. And that's what, I think that's what makes football so dynamic and interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, scoring was quite a bit down last year, 22 to 23. So defenses figured something out, and now it'll be fun this year to see if offenses punch back in a different strategic way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with what we talked about with the zone coverages. We're capping verticals. We're limiting explosive plays. You're going to have to. Defenses are now dying by 1,000 cuts instead of just letting you just cut. Hey, if we just don't have the guys, we're just going to get smoked. Game's going to be over, and then you're going to run the ball to finish the game. I think that to me is where we're really seeing a big difference. Defenses are compressing the field. They're using cutoff valves. They're doing coverage rotations that we really haven't seen. The thing about, I talk to a lot of older coaches when we talk about Fangio. They'll tell me that's all Dick LeBeau, that's Dom Capers. That's who built that. And really, all of this goes back to the 89 New Orleans Saints with Mora, the original Mora Sr. All these guys came from this camp and this defense. What's unique is playing everything from a two-high shell. I think that, to me, we're not losing. And that's where I said earlier, like the big misnomer about the kind of where we are. The NFL is not becoming a quarters league. I mean, we're still seeing way more snaps to cover three, almost 2 times more snaps to cover three than we are quarters. What we're doing now, though, is disguising coverages. We're playing from depth, meaning that we can now see vertical routes. And we're forcing these offenses to be checked. We're forcing Pat Mahomes to be a check down Charlie, which is something that that's a term that you don't want. Davis Webb, who's the quarterback coach for the Broncos, said it in a press conference earlier this year. That's the first thing he told his quarterbacks when they got into the meeting room was, there will be no check down Charlies here. And so we're actually seeing this in the way that plays are being designed as well with offenses to try and counter this.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and I know Scott wants to go somewhere here, but that check down Charlie thing, I think like we used to always think about big plays in terms of offense. Like Mahomes gets a 50-yard pass, Joe Burrow gets a 50-yard pass, Derrick Henry rips off a long run, and those are your explosives. But I think what defense has figured out is if they can prevent the explosives on the offensive side, they just make the offense run enough plays until they get the big play, until the defense gets the interception, forces the turnover, gets a turnover on downs. So I think there's a lot of looking at the big plays from the defensive side of the ball, be patient, because that's the only way to stop them.
Yeah. 100%, Sasha. Cody, I want to try to take us a little bit towards like there's a meta shift in the way teams are playing defense, and offenses are now trying to figure out how to respond. And just, I know that we're going to be focused on defense today and like over the next couple weeks. So I'm just trying to think about like how do we think about this shift going into 2024? And so let me read you guys the top 10 defenses by total EPA allowed. So expected points allowed for the 2023 defense. These were top 10 defenses in the league. Number 1, Cleveland, by quite frankly a really wide margin. Number 2, Baltimore. Number 3, Jets. Number 4, Dallas. Number 5, Kansas City, Super Bowl champions. Number 6, San Francisco. Number 7, New Orleans. Number 8, New England. Number 9, Buffalo. And number 10, Pittsburgh, which are probably, those are the 10 defenses worth talking about last year. Just curious from either of your perspective, like, how do we think about that man zone shift and what made those defenses good? And are there, I know there's been some D coordinator changes, like any of those teams you would expect to drop off compared to what they did last year?
Yeah, I'll go first. I really think if you look at it, the Browns are an anomaly. There's always an exception to the rule, and the Browns are that. They are built to play man coverage. Their defensive line is built to get after the quarterbacks. They can win with 4. I think their linebackers are really good, but we are seeing this though with the conversation on contract with JOK is he's not that great in man coverage. They play a lot of man coverage. That's what they want to do. They're not going to break the bank. That's why I think that contract's going to get dragged out to the beginning of the year. Then you go look at like a team like Dallas, another outlier that wants to play a lot of man, but they have added in a trap 2 element of it. So they are smart about when they implement zone. The common denominator in there is that those guys have really good quarterback tandems, right? They have really good personnel that is man-centered. They have built their defenses to do that. Everybody else, you could go down that list. You could argue the Saints, they want to run a lot of cover 1. Again, you're looking at Mark Lattimore, who is a very good man corner. They have another one in Paulson Adobo on the other side, another good quarterback tandem. Then you go even further down, the Steelers, they've always been a man team. That's just who they are. So when you're looking at it, it matches what's in the NFL, right? You have the Ravens who are very zone-centric. You have the 49ers who are very zone-centric. Then you have guys like the Browns and the Cowboys who they just want to play cover 1 to everything. So I think it matches up, but we're still tilted more on the zone side than we are on the man side.
Yeah. Scott, you ask about like defenses that could take a step back. And I don't have, you don't know until you see it on the field, but I feel like Mike McDonald got a head coaching job for a reason, and brain drain's a real thing. And like we saw it with the Eagles last year, they lost both coordinators going into the season, and they didn't look like the same team in that season. So I just think you watch out for teams that lose a defensive coordinator, especially if they lose them to a head coaching job, because that means the guy was really good. Especially in today's NFL, if a defensive guy gets a head coaching job, people have to think really highly of him, and he has to be a really smart guy because they want to hire offensive guys if they can. So I look at Mike McDonald leaving Baltimore to become the Seattle head coach and Zach Orr stepping in there, and we'll just have to wait and see. That's the one of those 10 that stands out to me. I'm curious, is there someone outside of the 10 that you guys think could jump into one of those spots?
I think Jaguars for sure. I think Nielsen is awesome. If you watch the Falcons last year, the Falcons actually didn't have a terrible defense. If you look at EPA, like they were not actually that bad. I think he comes from that Saints tree, which
they were number 11.
Right, exactly. So we're already there. And I think he does an excellent job. He varies his coverages. You got to give kudos to him because he's a D-line guy and their secondary actually plays really well. I do think the Lions changing their cornerback room will have an effect. That was a defense that was 2 corners away from being really good. And I think they're another one. And then I like my third would be the Giants with Shane Bowen. I think Bowen does a really good job, and he was with the Titans last year.
Yeah. Sasha, I got 2 for you. And it is also centered on this idea of a D coordinator change, which look like coordinators are the play callers in many ways, like they run this league and what happens on the field. One, I'm looking at Seattle, which Seattle was 30th in the league in terms of EPA allowed last year. So not good. I think a lot of people like to look at Geno Smith and put the blame for some of their mediocre performance on him. The reality is like their defense hasn't been good for a couple of years now. And Mike McDonald, many people think he's a defensive savant. Now, he doesn't have Kyle Hamilton and he doesn't have Roquan Smith, but I would expect Seattle's defense to be better. We're going to see how he can do against that like McVay Shanahan coaching tree because he's going to see both of them twice a year. And then the other one is Green Bay. And I don't know, like, Cody, you would know more than me, but bringing Jeff Hafley in from Boston College, new defensive coordinator, we know some of the struggles Brady had before him, but I think their talent, like, they've drafted so many guys in the top 2 rounds on that defense, and they've underperformed over the last couple of years. I think they were 23rd in EPA allowed last year. So, like, I would expect them to take a jump, and if they do, watch out for the Packers this year.
Yeah, in fact, I've talked about the Packers a lot on a couple different podcasts. I think they're a year away from being in the Super Bowl, and I think it's just because of the young talent that they brought in to reshuffle the secondary. If you go and you look at what they did in the draft, you know exactly what Jeff Hafley wants to do. He wants to run 4 down front. He wants to play a lot of cover 1, and he wants to be able to have multiple tools that can move around in different pieces for matchup purposes. So he's going to be a package guy. He's got one of the best blitz packages already. He's a Rex Ryan guy. He worked with my mentor and Phil Bennett in Pitt, who also is a Rex Ryan blitz guy. So he's got the pressure situation handled. The question to me is going to be how much cover 1 are they going to want to play? They've got 2 corners who are basically fighting for their supper right now. They got 2 guys that are in contract years. They're really going to have a boost up. And I'll finish with Seattle. Seattle has probably one of the better safety tandems. And then with Tavon Wallace, who's coming from the Titans, had a breakout year last year. That's where you see a lot of that. He may not have Kyle Hamilton, but he's got 3 safeties that can do a lot of things. I think that defense, when you really look at it and what they've done, they're a corner away. That's a team that be looking for a trade before the year or one of these veteran corners that are out there, bringing them back in because they are 1 corner away from being a really good defense.
Yeah, all good call outs. Just because we wouldn't be a sports talk show without talking about the Cowboys, dim boys. How do you think about the Dan Quinn to Mike Zimmer switch on the defensive side for them and how that makes them look different and makes their personnel look different?
I think it's going to be completely different. And if you've seen any of the sound bites that Micah Parsons has been out there, I don't think he's really happy with it. The thing that Quinn did a really good job was really appeasing. In fact, that was my article that came out Monday, was talking about on Match Quarters, was talking about Micah Parsons and how the Cowboys essentially he wanted to play off-ball backer. He thinks himself as a kind of this hybrid joker type player that can play edge, he can play off ball. If you put him at safety, he can play safety kind of guy, which you want those guys and you want elite guys like that. The problem is he's not very good at off ball. He's very average at off ball linebacker. If it's not just a run right at him. And you can tell what the Cowboys did. They moved him around, they moved him at off ball, and then they blitzed him. In fact, his numbers for off ball play have just shrunk. You go to look at Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer is an old, crusty dude. He is not going to play around with that. He's already told you're going to be playing defensive end. You're going to be rushing the passer. That's your job. Now, I think the defense is going to change. Yes, they're going to be more multiple in coverages. They're going to probably have a better blitz package. You're not going to try and answer the problems with cover 1. So I think it will be different. I think they'll take a little bit of a step back this year just because it's a different system. And there's already been a little bit of turmoil already in that whole entire organization.
It sounds like Cody doesn't have a point of view on the Cowboys.
I live in Dallas. I hear about it like literally every single day. I could care less, but because I'm not a Cowboy fan, I'm like the unbiased opinion that has to hear it all the time. So I get blasted with Cowboy stuff all the time. But this is a team that did nothing. They did absolutely nothing in free agency other than bring in linebackers because Mike Zimmer is not going to play with safety as a will linebacker.
I was just going to say, I feel like I could pull one of 32 teams out of a hat and he could do the same thing he just did with the Cowboys.
Yeah,
So
100%. That's what was so funny to me. Is
living in Dallas was a cop out. You were going to do that regardless of who I said.
Yeah, exactly. Just a random question, and Cody dropped like 5 minutes worth of like detailed football analysis.
Yeah, I love it. It's the matchup by Field Vision Sports. We're having a good time. Scott, Cody, anything you guys want to add before I wrap it for the people here on the inaugural episode of the matchup by Field Vision Sports?
No, listen, I'm pumped for us to get this rolling and talk football all the way into the season. So it's going to be fun, and I think people are going to learn a bunch listening to it.
You can catch us on Twitter, or X as they call it, at Field Vision MI, on Instagram at Field Vision Sports. We've got a TikTok handle as well at Field Vision MI if you want to check out some highlight videos and things like that. FieldVisionSports.com is where you can find us on the web and sign up for our newsletter. You've been listening to the matchup by Field Vision Sports. We had a great time. We'll see you next time.